My name is Kiara, and at 31 years old, I thought I had finally built the perfect life. I was a senior financial auditor, married to a brilliant corporate lawyer, and 5 months pregnant with our first child. But during our lavish first anniversary party, a complete stranger walked into the ballroom, grabbed a microphone, and told 200 of our closest friends and family that the baby I was carrying belonged to him. The betrayal that followed from my own blood relatives was staggering, but my husband's next move left the entire room speechless. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch your family turn against you when you needed them most. Trust me, you will want to hear how this ends. The crystal chandeliers of the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton Ballroom cast a warm golden glow over the evening. 200 guests dressed in evening gowns and tailored tuxedos sat around tables decorated with towering arrangements of white roses. It was our first wedding anniversary, and the celebration was flawless. I sat at the head table wearing a custom silk gown that perfectly draped over my 5-month baby bump. Beside me stood Julian, my husband. Julian was a highly respected mergers and acquisitions attorney. He was 34 years old, handsome, driven, and fiercely protective of our life together. Julian tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The gentle chime cut through the low murmur of jazz music. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. He looked down at me with a smile that made my heart race. To my beautiful wife, Kiara. Julian began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the room. This past year has been the greatest adventure of my life. You are not only the sharpest financial mind I have ever known, but you are the heart of our family. As we prepare to welcome our first child into the world, I want to make a promise. I will spend the rest of my days ensuring that you and our baby never know a single moment of doubt. I love you, Kiara. A collective sigh swept through the crowd. My mother Evelyn sat at the VIP table, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, while my older sister Sasha smiled for the cameras. I reached up to take Julian's hand, feeling a profound sense of peace. After years of fighting for my place in a family that always viewed me as an afterthought, I had finally created my own sanctuary. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a violent crash. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The string quartet stopped playing instantly. Heads whipped around, the elegant atmosphere shattered as a man stepped into the light. I had never seen him before. He looked completely out of place among the black tie attire. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that strained against his broad shoulders. Dark tattoos crept up his neck. He walked with an arrogant swagger, his heavy boots thudding against the polished floor. A wave of whispers rippled through the guests. I felt Julian tighten his grip on my hand. His posture shifted from relaxed to rigid. I looked at the stranger, expecting him to be a confused hotel guest, but his eyes were locked dead onto me. His gaze was cold, calculated, and entirely purposeful. "Wait right there," a security guard said, stepping into the aisle to block the man. The stranger shoved the guard aside with shocking force. "I have business with the man of the hour," he shouted. He marched straight up to the head table. My heart pounded against my ribs. Julian stepped slightly in front of me, shielding my body with his own. The man stopped just 2 feet away from us. He reached into his jacket pocket. Guests gasped, fearing a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a thick stack of glossy papers. He slammed them down onto our pristine white tablecloth right next to our wedding cake. I looked down. They were ultrasound photos. Dozens of them. Stacked beneath them were pages of printed text messages. Before anyone could react, the man reached over and snatched the microphone right out of Julian's hand. The speakers let out a sharp squeal of feedback, causing several guests to cover their ears. The stranger turned to face the crowd of shocked elites. "Sorry to ruin the perfect party, counselor," the man said, staring directly at Julian with a twisted smirk. "You give a great speech. You really do. But you are celebrating a lie. Because the baby your wife is carrying is mine." A heavy silence hung in the air for a fraction of a second before total chaos erupted inside the ballroom. Gasps echoed from every corner of the vast room. Whispers ignited into loud, furious chatter among the guests. Several people stood up from their tables, craning their necks to get a better look at the intruder. I stood frozen, staring at the tattooed man in the cheap gray suit. My brain struggled to process the sheer absurdity of his vicious words. I had never laid eyes on this person in my entire life. Security guards finally broke through the dense crowd rushing toward the head table to intervene. But before they could grab the stranger, someone else moved much faster. It was Preston, my arrogant brother-in-law. Preston was a wealthy white real estate developer who had married my older sister Sasha exactly 5 years ago. He came from an old money family with a long lineage of wealth and power. He never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of that fact. Since the day we met, he had always looked down on me, treating me like an uncultured charity case, who somehow managed to trick a brilliant lawyer into a lucrative marriage. Preston lunged forward and snatched the microphone out of the stranger's hand. I expected him to defend our family and our honor. I expected him to yell for the guards to throw the madman out. Instead, Preston turned his back on the stranger and faced the 200 guests. He held the microphone close to his mouth, adjusting his expensive silk tie with a look of deep fake sorrow on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Preston said, his voice echoing loudly over the massive speakers. "I am so incredibly sorry that you all have to witness this terrible tragedy tonight. I truly am. But as a man who values integrity and family honor, I cannot say I am entirely surprised by this dark revelation." My jaw dropped in absolute shock. I looked at Julian, but Julian was staring intently at the stack of forged ultrasound photos on the table, his expression completely unreadable. "Preston, what are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with pure panic and rising anger. "Give the microphone to security immediately. This man is insane and needs to leave." Preston ignored me completely, acting as if I did not even exist. He placed a firm hand on Julian's shoulder, acting like a protective older brother. He looked out at the sea of shocked faces and sighed dramatically into the microphone. We all know Kiara did not grow up with the same privileges and values as the rest of us here. She came from a very different background. A background where desperate people are taught to grab whatever wealth they can by any means necessary. When Julian decided to marry her, my family warned him repeatedly about the massive risks. We told him that a girl who spent her youth running the streets of a blue-collar neighborhood could never truly adapt to the fierce loyalty and class required of a man of his great stature. We hoped she would change her ways. Clearly, the allure of her old habits and old companions was just too strong for her to resist. The ballroom erupted into loud murmurs of disapproval once again. My face burned with intense humiliation. Preston was weaponizing my difficult past against me right here in front of my closest friends, esteemed colleagues, and corporate clients. He was referring to the 2 years I took off from college. A period of time I spent working 3 exhausting jobs to keep my family afloat, while my sister Sasha secretly went to an extremely expensive rehab clinic. A dark secret I had kept perfectly hidden to protect her reputation. And now her ruthless husband was using that sacrifice to paint me as a low-class gold digger who had been cheating with random street thugs. "Julian, you need to act fast right now," Preston continued, turning to my husband with a look of fake urgency. "Do not let this woman manipulate you any further. This is a classic extortion trap designed to ruin you. As your loyal brother and your trusted friend, I am telling you to call your wealth manager right now. You need to freeze all of your joint bank accounts immediately before she tries to drain them and run away with this man. Cut off her credit cards right this second. Lock the heavy gates to the main estate. Do not let her take another dime of your hard-earned money ever again." I looked out at the massive crowd of guests. The faces that had been smiling at me were now twisted with disgust and pity. I finally found my voice. "I refuse to stand here and let this happen," I shouted. My hands shook violently, but I forced myself to stand tall, gripping the edge of the table. I looked directly at the crowd and then at my husband. I have absolutely no idea who this man is. I have never seen him before in my entire life. This is a disgusting setup. Julian, please look at me. Look me in the eyes. You know me. You know I would never do something like this. But Julian did not look up. He kept his eyes glued to the fake ultrasound photos. The tattooed stranger let out a loud, mocking laugh. A setup, he chuckled, shaking his head. Come on, Kiara, do not play dumb now. It makes you look desperate. Why do you not tell your fancy lawyer husband about our little weekend getaway to Miami last month? You know, the one where you complained about how suffocating this marriage was. Shut your mouth, I screamed. I felt a surge of pure rage course through my veins. You are a liar. I was in Chicago on an audit last month and my firm has the travel records to prove it. Who paid you to do this? Stop yelling, Kiara. A sharp voice echoed from the VIP table. I turned my head. It was my sister Sasha. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her expensive designer dress. She looked at me with an expression of pure disdain. You are making a massive scene and you are embarrassing all of us, she said, crossing her arms. Just admit the truth and stop humiliating Julian any further. I stared at her in disbelief. Embarrassing you? I asked, my voice cracking. Sasha, this strange man just walked in and accused me of the worst kind of betrayal. I am your sister. Why are you not defending me? Why are you taking his side? Sasha stepped closer to her husband Preston and linked her arm through his. Because this sounds exactly like the kind of trashy drama you always used to drag into our home, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Did you really think you could just play the perfect corporate wife forever and hide your true colors? We all remember what you are really like. We all remember those 2 years you completely dropped out of college. You vanished into the city running the streets with God knows who. You were desperate for quick cash and completely out of control. It was only a matter of time before your old habits caught up with you. The betrayal felt like a physical knife twisting deep in my chest. I could not breathe. I took those 2 years off from college to work 3 grueling minimum wage jobs. I did it to secretly pay for Sasha's luxury drug rehab program. I sacrificed my own education so our mother would not lose her prestigious standing at our church. I did it to protect Sasha's perfect pageant girl reputation. And now Sasha was standing in front of 200 people weaponizing my ultimate sacrifice to frame me as a reckless gold digger. Sasha, you know exactly why I took that time off? I warned her, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. Do not do this. Do not lie. Before Sasha could respond, my mother Evelyn stood up from her chair. She adjusted her pearls and looked at me with a gaze so cold it sent shivers down my spine. Sasha is absolutely right, Kiara, my mother said, her voice ringing out clearly across the dead silent ballroom. I prayed every single night that this marriage would finally fix your wild behavior. I prayed that a man of Julian's incredible caliber could somehow turn you into a respectable woman. Mom, I whispered, feeling hot tears prick my eyes. How can you say that? But you cannot wash the mud off a pig and expect it to stay clean. Evelyn continued ruthlessly, completely ignoring my tears. You have always been the stubborn, reckless child. You have always been jealous of your sister and hungry for things you did not earn. You have brought absolute shame to our family name tonight, Kiara. I am deeply sorry, Julian. We tried to warn you about her true nature, but we hoped we were wrong. Clearly, we were not. The silence in the room became absolutely suffocating. My own flesh and blood had just handed me over to the wolves without a second of hesitation. They were eagerly validating the lies of a complete stranger just to tear me down. I turned my desperate gaze back to Julian, praying he would finally speak up and defend our family right now when I really needed him most. Julian was an apex predator in the courtroom. He was a man who destroyed multi-million-dollar corporate mergers with a single calculated sentence. I had seen him tear hostile witnesses apart without ever raising his voice. I fully expected him to turn that lethal intellect onto the stranger standing before us and annihilate his lies. But Julian did not move. He did not say a single word in my defense. He did not even look at me. Instead, his eyes were entirely fixed on a single piece of paper the tattooed man had tossed onto the table alongside the fake ultrasound photos. It was a fabricated DNA test result. The paper bore the official-looking logo of a prominent Atlanta medical clinic. I knew it was a complete forgery, but the sheer audacity of the document seemed to paralyze my powerful husband. "Julian, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the loud murmurs of the 200 guests. "Tell them this is a lie. Tell Preston to back down. You are a brilliant lawyer, Julian. You know these documents are fake. You know I have never been unfaithful to you." The tattooed man, Dante, leaned forward and tapped a thick finger against the forged DNA results. "Numbers do not lie," Counselor Dante mocked with a filthy grin. 99.9% probability. I told you I came here to claim what is mine. You can keep the fancy mansion and the sports cars. I just want my kid and my woman back. My stomach violently twisted at his sickening words. I reached out and gently touched Julian's arm. His muscles were tight like coiled steel. I expected him to throw a punch or at least call for the hotel security team to drag Dante out of the ballroom. Then Julian finally moved. He reached out and picked up the piece of paper. He held it up to the light of the crystal chandelier. His dark eyes scanned the fraudulent numbers and the forged signature at the bottom of the page. I watched his face closely, waiting for the moment of realization. I waited for the spark of anger to ignite in his eyes when he realized someone had dared to insult his intelligence with such a cheap, desperate trick. But the anger never came. Instead, his expression completely emptied. The warmth and profound love that had filled his eyes just 10 minutes ago during his beautiful speech entirely vanished. A terrifying glacial coldness took its place. It was the exact same expression he wore when he was about to finalize a ruthless corporate bankruptcy and destroy a rival company. "Julian," I gasped, feeling a sudden icy wave of genuine panic wash over my entire body. "Say something. Please say something." Julian slowly lowered the piece of paper. He placed it carefully back onto the pristine white tablecloth, right next to my customized dinner plate. Then he looked at me. It was not a look of heartbreak or a look of rage. It was a look of absolute detachment. He looked at me as if I were a complete stranger he had just passed on the street. It was a look that completely shattered my soul into a million pieces. Without breaking eye contact, Julian raised his left hand. He grasped his heavy gold wedding band with his right fingers. My breath caught in my throat. I shook my head frantically, silently begging him to stop. He slid the gold band off his finger. He dropped the ring onto the table. The heavy metal hit the fine china plate with a loud, sharp clink that echoed painfully through the microphone still resting nearby. The sound was like a final nail being driven into the coffin of my marriage. Julian leaned forward and grabbed the microphone. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Everyone waited to hear the verdict of the brilliant corporate attorney who had just been publicly humiliated. "Preston is right," Julian said, his voice deadly calm and utterly devoid of any emotion. "I need to call the bank." He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud thud, causing another wave of harsh feedback. Julian turned his back on me. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and calmly walked away from the head table. He strode down the center aisle of the ballroom, passing the hundreds of staring guests. He did not look back. He did not hesitate. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him with a final hollow thud that resonated deep in my chest. I stood entirely alone at the front of the massive room. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, broken only by the sharp whispers of Atlanta high society, judging my every breath. My husband, the man who had promised to protect me from every doubt, had just abandoned me to the wolves. I was completely surrounded by enemies. I saw the vicious smirks of my sister Sasha and her husband Preston, who were already plotting how to divide my assets. I saw the cold, triumphant glare of my mother Evelyn, who looked relieved that my fairy tale life was finally burning to the ground. And standing right beside me, the tattooed stranger Dante let out a low, victorious chuckle, crossing his arms over his chest. The isolation was absolute and terrifying. The life I had built was entirely gone. The ballroom emptied with dizzying speed. Hotel staff in crisp uniforms hurried to clear the tables and escort the whispering guests out of the room. I stood frozen by the head table, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding around me. Before I could even attempt to follow Julian, a heavy hand clamped down hard on my upper arm. I gasped and turned to see Preston glaring at me with vicious intensity. His fingers dug painfully into my skin as he forcefully pulled me away from the main floor. Sasha and my mother Evelyn flanked us like prison guards, marching me down a dimly lit hallway toward a private VIP suite located just behind the banquet kitchens. I stumbled over the hem of my silk gown, but Preston did not slow down. He shoved me through the heavy oak doors of the suite and locked them firmly behind us. I barely had time to catch my breath before the room spun out of control. A sharp, stinging pain exploded across my left cheek. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side and sent me crashing back against a leather sofa. I brought my hand up to my burning face and looked up in complete shock. My mother Evelyn stood over me, her chest heaving with rage. Her hand was still raised in the air. She had just slapped me across the face with everything she had. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, searching her eyes for even a single ounce of maternal sympathy. There was absolutely nothing there but pure, unadulterated hatred. "You foolish, ungrateful little girl," Evelyn hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "Do you have any idea what you have just done to this family? You have completely destroyed us." I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell her again that I had never seen that tattooed man before in my life. But Evelyn cut me off before I could speak a single syllable. "I do not want to hear your pathetic lies," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You sat there acting like the perfect corporate wife while hiding your filthy secrets. You humiliated us in front of 200 of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Do you know who was sitting at our table, Kiara? Preston's parents were sitting right next to me. The most respected old money family in this entire state had to sit there and watch my daughter get exposed as a cheap, deceitful fraud." Sasha crossed her arms and sneered down at me. Preston's mother practically choked on her champagne. Sasha added, her voice dripping with disgust. She looked at us like we were absolute trash. "You dragged us right back to the bottom, Kiara. You made us look like we belong in the ghetto." I pushed myself up from the leather sofa, my cheek throbbing and my vision blurred with tears. I looked at Sasha and then at Preston, who was leaning against the locked door with a smug, satisfied look on his face. He looked entirely too calm for a man whose family honor had allegedly just been insulted. It was as if he was enjoying a show he had directed himself. "You are all crazy," I whispered, shaking my head slowly. "I am innocent, and Julian will figure that out. He is a brilliant lawyer, and he will see right through this ridiculous setup." Evelyn let out a harsh, bitter laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Julian is a brilliant lawyer, and that is exactly why he walked out on you," Evelyn snapped, stepping closer to me. "He is not going to save you, Kiara. He is going to crush you. He is probably on the phone with his legal team right now, drawing up divorce papers and making sure you do not get a single dime of his fortune. And I do not blame him one bit." My mother leaned down so her face was only inches from mine. Her eyes were cold and dead. "You are going to pack your bags tonight," she ordered, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are going to go back to Julian's mansion, grab your cheap clothes and get out before he calls the police and has you thrown out like a trespasser. You are no longer a part of this family. Do not ever call me again. Do not ever come to my house. You are entirely on your own now." I looked at the three of them, finally realizing the terrifying truth. They did not care about my innocence or my unborn child. They only cared about their social status and their wealth. My mother had officially disowned me, and my nightmare was only just beginning. A sharp metallic click suddenly echoed through the dead silent VIP suite. I snapped my head toward the sound. Preston had just turned the heavy brass deadbolt on the double oak doors, locking us inside. He slowly slipped the cold key into his tailored suit pocket and walked directly toward the center of the room. The smug satisfaction on his face had morphed into something entirely predatory. He did not look like a concerned brother-in-law protecting his family. He looked like a ruthless businessman about to close a lucrative deal. Preston set his leather briefcase on the glass coffee table and unfastened the gold clasps with a sharp snap. Evelyn and Sasha stood perfectly still, watching him with eager anticipation, like starving wolves waiting for their alpha to carve the meat. I stayed frozen on the leather sofa, my cheek still burning from my mother's slap. My heart hammered against my ribs as Preston pulled a thick manila envelope from the briefcase and tossed it onto the table. "Let us drop all the emotional theatrics for a moment, Kiara," Preston said, his voice slick and cold. "Julian is a ruthless man when crossed. You know his courtroom reputation. He is going to file for divorce by tomorrow morning. He will hire aggressive litigators to freeze every asset you share, drag your name through the mud, and take full custody of that baby. He will leave you on the street with absolutely nothing." I stared at him, wrapping my trembling hands protectively around my pregnant belly. "You do not know Julian at all," I shot back. "He is angry now, but he is a logical man. Once he cools down, he will demand a real paternity test and see Dante is a complete fraud." Preston let out a low, mocking chuckle. "You are incredibly naive, Kiara. Do you really think Julian cares about the truth at this point? You humiliated him in front of his most important corporate clients. In his world, perception is everything. The damage to his pristine reputation is already done. He needs a scapegoat, and you are the perfect target. But lucky for you, I am in a unique position to help." "Help me," I repeated slowly, staring at him in sheer disbelief. "You just spent the last 20 minutes assassinating my character in front of 200 people." Preston simply ignored my anger and pulled a stack of crisp legal documents from the envelope. He slid them across the glass table toward me along with a silver fountain pen. "My family firm represents Julian's biggest real estate holdings," Preston explained. "I have leverage with him. I can convince him to handle this quietly. I can make sure you walk away from this marriage with a generous settlement. I can ensure he does not destroy your career. I can play the peacemaker and save you from ruin." I looked down at the documents. The bold black letters at the top of the page made my blood run cold. It was a transfer of ownership agreement. "But my protection comes with a very specific price." Preston continued, his tone dropping. "Your father left you a 15% controlling stake in the family trust before he died. That stake gives you veto power over all of our financial decisions. It is the only reason Sasha and your mother cannot liquidate the primary estate and access the offshore reserve funds. You are going to sign that stake over to Sasha right now." Suddenly, the entire puzzle clicked together in my mind with terrifying clarity. This had nothing to do with Julian or the stranger named Dante. This had nothing to do with family honor or my mother's social standing at her church. This was a hostile corporate takeover disguised as a family tragedy. My late father was brilliant, and he knew Sasha was reckless with money, and Preston was incredibly greedy. He left me the controlling 15% specifically to protect the family fortune from being drained by them. For 5 years, Preston tried every legal loophole to get his hands on my shares. I blocked him at every turn. Now he was using my vulnerable pregnancy and a fabricated cheating scandal to extort me. "You planned this," I whispered, looking up at his cold blue eyes. "You hired that tattooed man to crash my anniversary. You paid him to fake those ultrasound photos and humiliate me. You orchestrated this entire nightmare just to steal my inheritance." Preston smiled a chilling, empty smile. "Prove it," he challenged, tapping the silver pen against the glass table. "You have 60 seconds to sign these papers, Kiara. Sign them and I will save you from Julian's wrath. Refuse, and I will personally make sure you lose everything you have ever loved." I stared at the silver pen resting on the glass table. The metal gleamed under the harsh overhead lights of the VIP suite. 60 seconds to sign away my father's legacy. 60 seconds to surrender to the people who had just publicly executed my marriage. I slowly reached my hand out, hovering my trembling fingers over the pen. My mother Evelyn let out a long sigh of relief, while Sasha crossed her arms and offered a smug, victorious smile. But my fingers did not grab the pen. Instead, I curled my hand into a tight fist and slammed it down onto the glass table. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the chaos swirling inside my chest. Preston's cold blue eyes narrowed into a dangerous glare. "Do not be an idiot, Kiara," he warned, stepping closer to the table. "You have zero leverage here. If you walk out that door without signing this document, you will face the absolute destruction of your life. Julian will bury you, and my family will ensure you never work in corporate finance again." I pushed myself up from the leather sofa, ignoring the sharp, throbbing pain in my cheek where my mother had slapped me. "You want to talk about destruction, Preston?" I asked, locking eyes with him. "Let us talk about destruction. Let us talk about exactly why I had to take 2 years off from college. The 2 years you just loved bringing up in front of 200 people to prove I was some kind of street rat." Sasha's smug smile instantly vanished, her face drained of color. "Stop it, Kiara," she snapped, her voice suddenly laced with genuine panic. "Do not try to change the subject. Just sign the damn papers." I turned my gaze to my older sister, letting all the years of silent resentment finally boil over. "I am not changing the subject, Sasha," I fired back, taking a step toward her. "I am setting the record straight, because I am so incredibly tired of being the scapegoat for your perfect little life. I took those 2 years off from my degree to work 3 grueling minimum wage jobs. I flipped burgers until 2 a.m., I scrubbed floors in office buildings, and I delivered groceries on weekends. Do you know why I did that, Preston?" Preston frowned, looking genuinely confused as he glanced back and forth between me and his wife. "Because you were broke and out of control," he muttered, reciting the lie they had fed him. "No," I said, my voice echoing loudly off the walls. "Because my perfect angelic sister Sasha had a massive cocaine addiction that almost killed her." "Shut your mouth!" Sasha screamed, lunging forward, but my mother quickly grabbed her arm to hold her back. Our mother was terrified. Her prestigious standing at the church would be ruined if anyone found out her golden child was an addict. I continued, my words slicing through the room like a blade. "She refused to use the family funds because the trust required multiple signatures and questions would be asked. So she begged me to help. I drained my own college savings and worked myself to the bone to secretly pay for Sasha's private luxury rehab clinic in Malibu for 8 months. I kept her dirty secret perfectly hidden so she could come back clean, marry into your wealthy family, and pretend she was perfect. I sacrificed my own future to save hers." Preston stared at Sasha in absolute shock. The arrogant sneer on his face faltered. He looked at his beautiful, polished wife, realizing the pristine image he had married was entirely manufactured. "Sasha, is this true?" he demanded, his voice hard. Sasha avoided his eyes, staring at the floor as her chest heaved with anxious breaths. "She is twisting it," she stammered defensively. "I had a minor setback. It was not a big deal. She is just trying to manipulate you, Preston. Make her sign the paper right now. Do not let her get away with this." "Oh, I am getting away with nothing," I said, picking up the transfer document and tearing it straight down the middle. "My father left me that 15% stake because he knew exactly who you both were. He knew Sasha was reckless, and he knew you, Preston, were greedy. He gave me that power to protect our family from people exactly like you. And there is absolutely no way I am handing it over to a man who hires a thug to ruin my wedding anniversary." Evelyn marched forward, her face contorted with pure rage. "You ungrateful little wretch!" she hissed, raising her hand as if she was going to strike me again. I did not flinch. I stood my ground and looked down at my mother. "Hit me again, Mom," I challenged, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Hit a pregnant woman. But understand this, if I walk out of this room, I am going straight to the police. I will demand a full investigation into Dante and the wire transfers Preston used to hire him. I will rip open the books on the family trust and expose every single cent you have been secretly moving around. Sasha's eyes widened in absolute terror. She grabbed Preston's sleeve, pulling at the fabric. "Preston, do something," she pleaded frantically. "She is going to ruin everything. If she goes to the police, my reputation will be destroyed. Force her to sign it. Do whatever you have to do, but get that signature right now." Sasha stepped back, breathing heavily, as she watched her husband. Preston did not yell or lose his temper. Instead, a cold and calculated smile crept back onto his face. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He unlocked the screen with a quick swipe and tapped on his email application. He held the bright screen up for me to see. "Look closely," Kiara Preston commanded, his tone dangerously calm. I narrowed my eyes and focused on the glowing screen. It was an email draft addressed to several high-profile editors at the Atlanta Business Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal, and various elite financial blogs. The subject line read, "Exclusive Senior Auditor, Caught in Extortion and Paternity Scandal at Ritz-Carlton." My stomach plummeted as my eyes scanned the body of the email. It was a masterfully written hit piece. It detailed the entire fabricated scene that had just unfolded in the ballroom. It quoted Dante claiming I had been funneling my husband's money to pay for our illicit weekend trips. It also included a twisted version of my college gap years, painting me as a former street hustler who had conned her way into a top accounting firm. It ended with a call for the state board to revoke my certified public accountant license, pending a criminal fraud investigation. "You are a monster," I whispered, feeling a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "I am a survivor," Preston corrected smoothly, tapping the screen of his phone. "My family built our empire by knowing exactly how to eliminate threats. And right now, you are a massive threat to my future wealth. You pride yourself on your spotless professional reputation, Kiara. You think being a senior financial auditor makes you untouchable, but your entire career is built on one single pillar: trust. If I press the send button, your clients will drop you by morning. Your firm will fire you before lunch. The ethics board will suspend your license by the end of the week. You will never work in corporate finance again." "You cannot prove any of those lies," I argued, though. My voice trembled slightly. "I do not need to prove anything." Preston laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. "I just need to plant the seed of doubt. In the corporate world, an accusation this loud is an immediate death sentence. By the time you manage to clear your name, the damage will be permanent. You will be a pregnant, unemployed outcast going through a brutal divorce against Julian. He will use this exact article in court to take full custody of your child." He lowered his phone and stepped right up to the edge of the glass coffee table. He pointed his finger at the torn transfer document. "I have a second copy in my briefcase," Preston said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'm going to pull it out right now, and you are going to sign it." He unlatched the leather briefcase again and retrieved a fresh, pristine copy of the legal transfer. He smoothed it out over the glass and placed the silver fountain pen right in the center of the paper. Then he pulled up the clock application on his phone and set a timer. "You have exactly 60 seconds," Kiara Preston announced, hitting the start button on the screen. 60 seconds to decide what kind of life you want to live. Sign the paper and you get to keep your prestigious career. You get a quiet, peaceful divorce settlement from Julian. You get to walk away and raise your baby in comfort. Refuse to sign and I hit send. I will burn your entire life to the ground and dance in the ashes. 50 seconds, my mother Evelyn chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "Just do what he says, you stubborn brat. Do not ruin everything for the rest of us." 45 seconds, Sasha added nervously, biting her perfectly manicured fingernails. I stared at the glowing red numbers counting down on Preston's phone screen. The room felt incredibly small and the air grew thick and suffocating. My mind raced through a dozen different scenarios, but every single one ended with me losing. If I signed, I was handing over millions of dollars to the people who had just destroyed my family. If I refused, my career and my ability to provide for my unborn child would be instantly obliterated. 30 seconds, Preston warned, holding his thumb aggressively over the send icon on his email application. Make the smart choice, Kiara. My hands shook violently as I looked down at the cold silver pen. I was entirely trapped. There was no way out of this locked room without losing everything I had ever built. 20 seconds, Preston declared, his voice sharp and unyielding. The digital numbers on his phone screen flashed red, mimicking the rapid pounding of my heart. I looked at the silver pen lying on the glass table. It felt incredibly heavy, like an anchor waiting to drag me down to the bottom of the ocean. Evelyn stood behind me, her arms crossed tight against her chest, while Sasha nervously tapped her designer heel against the hardwood floor. They had won. They had expertly cornered me, isolated me from my husband, and weaponized my deepest fears. The sheer weight of the impending destruction was crushing. If I did not sign that paper, I would lose my hard-earned career, my spotless professional reputation, and any chance I had of providing a secure life for my unborn child. Julian, the brilliant lawyer who could have protected me, had walked away believing the lies of a cheap thug. I was completely alone. A hot tear slipped down my cheek and splashed onto the glass table. I reached out with a trembling hand and wrapped my fingers around the cold silver barrel of the pen. 10 seconds. Preston counted, his thumb hovering dangerously close to the send button on his phone. Do the right thing, Kiara. Protect your baby. Protect your future. Sign the paper now. I took a deep, shaky breath. I pulled the cap off the pen and pressed the metal tip down onto the signature line of the transfer document. A tiny dot of black ink bled into the thick paper. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing to surrender my father's legacy to the very people who had just orchestrated my public execution. But my signature was never completed. Suddenly, a deafening, high-pitched siren shattered the heavy silence of the VIP suite. The noise was absolute agony, instantly drowning out Preston's countdown. Bright strobe lights flashed violently from the ceiling fixtures, casting harsh, erratic shadows across the room. It was the hotel fire alarm. Sasha shrieked, covering her ears with both hands. Evelyn stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of the leather sofa for balance. Preston dropped his phone onto the coffee table and cursed loudly, looking up at the flashing lights in pure confusion. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted over the blaring siren. In that exact moment of absolute chaos, I felt a sharp vibration against my left wrist. I looked down. My smartwatch screen was glowing brightly. It was not a standard text message. It was a notification from the heavily encrypted secure messaging application that Julian and I used exclusively for sensitive financial data transfers. The sender ID read Alpha 1, which was Julian's secure handle. My breath caught in my throat. I quickly tapped the screen to open the message. "Stall them," the text read. "Federal agents are in the elevator. I just traced the offshore wire." I read the two sentences 3 times. The words hit my brain like a massive shockwave, completely rewriting the reality of the last 30 minutes. He had not abandoned me. He had not believed Dante or the fake ultrasound photos or the forged DNA results. He had recognized the trap immediately and walked away to execute a lethal counterattack. The brilliant corporate attorney had simply removed himself from the emotional crossfire to gather the ammunition needed to completely obliterate our enemies. And he had just found the smoking gun. He had traced the money Preston used to pay the tattooed thug. The fire alarm continued to blare, its piercing scream echoing off the walls. Preston scrambled to pick up his phone, his face pale and panicked. He looked at the locked door and then back at me, pointing a frantic finger. "The time is up, Kiara," he yelled, his voice straining over the siren. "Sign it right now before we have to evacuate. I will send the email. I swear to God, I will hit send." I looked down at the silver pen still gripped tightly in my right hand. I looked at the tiny dot of black ink resting on the signature line. Then I slowly lifted the pen away from the paper. The crushing weight of fear and despair that had suffocated me moments ago vanished entirely. It was replaced by a surge of pure cold adrenaline. I dropped the silver pen onto the glass table. It landed with a sharp clatter that was barely audible over the screaming alarm. I stood up straight, squaring my shoulders. I looked directly at Preston. The trembling in my hands had completely stopped. I wiped the single tear from my cheek and allowed a slow, chilling smile to spread across my face. "Hit send?" I challenged, my voice surprisingly clear and calm amidst the chaos. "Hit the button, Preston, because I am not signing anything." The fire alarm abruptly cut off. The sudden silence in the VIP suite was heavier and more suffocating than the noise had been. The flashing strobe lights stopped, leaving only the glow of the chandeliers. I slowly leaned back against the leather sofa and crossed my legs, making myself entirely comfortable. The silver pen remained untouched on the glass coffee table right next to the unsigned transfer document. I looked up at Preston, watching the arrogant confidence drain from his face. He stared at me in disbelief. His thumb still hovered over his phone screen, but his hand was shaking with a nervous energy. "You are bluffing," he spat, his voice echoing in the room. "You do not have the guts to throw your career away." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "I am not throwing anything away, Preston," I replied calmly. "I am simply calling your bluff. Send the email right now. Let us see what happens when the Atlanta business journals receive a desperate hit piece from a man whose family is currently under federal investigation for massive financial fraud." Sasha let out a sharp gasp. "Federal investigation," she repeated, her voice trembling with sheer panic. "Preston, what is she talking about?" "Shut up, Sasha!" Preston snapped, turning his furious glare toward his wife. His polite, cultured mask, the one he had worn for 5 years to pretend he was a distinguished old money gentleman, completely shattered. His face turned a deep, ugly shade of crimson and the veins in his neck bulged. He looked like a wild animal backed into a corner. "Do not listen to her," he yelled, waving his arms frantically. "She is just trying to stall because she knows she is trapped. She is a manipulative liar. I am not the one who hired a tattooed thug to crash a wedding anniversary," I pointed out, smoothing a wrinkle on my silk maternity gown. "You made a massive mistake tonight, Preston. You thought Julian walked away because he believed your ridiculous charade. You thought he abandoned me. But Julian is a corporate attorney who destroys men like you before breakfast. The fire alarm was not an accident. It was pulled by his private security team to clear the building. He is not drawing up divorce papers. He is drawing up federal indictments." My mother, Evelyn, pressed her hands against her chest, taking rapid, shallow breaths. "Kiara, stop this nonsense right now," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You are going to ruin us all. Please, just sign the paper so we can go home." "We are not going anywhere," Preston roared, slamming his fist down onto the glass coffee table. The impact made the silver pen jump and clatter against the thick glass. He leaned over the table, getting dangerously close to my face. His breath smelled stale, and his eyes were wild with unfiltered rage. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Kiara?" he hissed, his voice dripping with pure venom. "You think you can outplay me in my own city? I will physically force you to sign this paper if I have to. I will break your fingers and guide the pen myself." He spun around and marched toward the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite. He grabbed the brass key from his pocket, jammed it into the deadbolt, and twisted it with a loud, sharp click. He yanked the doors open and stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. Less than 10 seconds later, he marched back into the room, dragging Dante by the collar of his cheap gray suit. The tattooed man stumbled into the suite, looking confused and highly agitated. "What is going on out there?" Dante demanded, shaking Preston's hand off his shoulder. "The entire hotel is crawling with men in black suits. We need to get out of here right now before the cops show up. Nobody is leaving until she signs the document," Preston ordered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Make her sign it, Dante. Do whatever you have to do to make her pick up that pen. I am paying you 100 grand to do a job, so finish it." Dante turned his dark, menacing gaze toward me. He cracked his knuckles loudly, taking a heavy step toward the leather sofa. Sasha covered her mouth with both hands, stepping back against the wall in horror. Evelyn closed her eyes, unwilling to watch the violence she had just authorized by siding with Preston. Dante loomed over me, casting a massive dark shadow across my body. He reached down and picked up the silver pen from the glass table, holding it out to me like a weapon. "Take the pen," Chiara. Dante growled, his voice deep and threatening. "Do not make me hurt a pregnant woman." I stared up at the massive man towering over me. His knuckles were heavily tattooed, and his grip on the silver pen was tight. Dante took another step forward, completely blocking the only clear path to the heavy oak doors. He was a human wall of muscle and bad intentions. I instinctively wrapped both of my arms around my pregnant belly, refusing to break eye contact with him. I would not let this thug intimidate me. Before Dante could reach out and grab my shoulder, my mother suddenly let out a loud, agonizing wail. The sound was so sharp and desperate that even Dante paused, looking over his shoulder in surprise. Evelyn collapsed onto the floor. She fell hard onto her knees right beside the glass coffee table. Tears streamed down her meticulously powdered face, ruining her expensive makeup. She clasped her hands together in a prayer position, lifting them up toward me. Her entire body shook with violent sobs. "Please, Chiara!" Evelyn cried, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "Please just take the pen. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Do not do this to me." I looked down at the woman who had just slapped me across the face minutes ago. The sudden shift from violent anger to pathetic desperation gave me mental whiplash. "Mom, get up," I demanded, feeling a sickening mixture of pity and disgust. "Stop putting on a show. You are embarrassing yourself." "It is not a show," Evelyn wailed, grabbing the hem of my silk maternity gown with her trembling hands. "You do not understand what is at stake here. You think this is just about Sasha's trust fund or Preston's greed, but it is not. It is about my life, Chiara. It is literally about my life." Preston stood silently near the doorway, watching the scene unfold with a cold, detached expression. He had unleashed Dante for physical intimidation, and now he was letting my mother use emotional blackmail to break my spirit. He was attacking me from every possible angle. "What are you talking about?" I asked, staring down at Evelyn. "My heart." Evelyn sobbed, pressing one hand dramatically against her chest. "The doctors found a severe blockage in my aortic valve last month. I need open heart surgery immediately. The procedure and the recovery care at the private specialty clinic will cost over $150,000. My insurance will not cover the out-of-network surgeons, and I do not have that kind of liquid cash lying around." I frowned, feeling a deep sense of confusion. "But Dad left you a $2 million pension fund," I countered. "You have more than enough money to pay for any surgery you need." Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, and a fresh wave of tears poured down her cheeks. She refused to look me in the eyes. "I cannot touch that money," she stammered defensively. "It is tied up. It is complicated. I went to Preston for help because he has connections with the best cardiologists in the state. He promised he would cover the entire cost of my surgery and my recovery. He promised to save my life." My stomach turned as the horrific truth finally sank in. I looked up at Preston, who simply offered a smug, indifferent shrug. "But he only agreed to pay for it if you helped him steal my inheritance," I realized, speaking the vile truth out loud. "You agreed to sell out your own daughter and your unborn grandchild to fund your medical bills." Evelyn gripped my dress tighter, pulling me slightly forward. "I had no other choice, Chiara," she pleaded, her voice rising to a frantic scream. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I raised you. You owe me this. If you do not sign that paper right now, Preston will withdraw his financial support. He will cancel the surgery, and I will die. I will suffer a massive heart attack, and it will be entirely your fault. My blood will be on your hands forever." Sasha stepped away from the wall and nodded eagerly. "You cannot let Mom die, Chiara," Sasha chimed in, her voice trembling. "Just sign the stupid document. It is just money. Is your pride really worth our mother's life? How could you be so incredibly selfish?" The sheer audacity of their accusations echoed in the small room. They were calling me selfish while they literally conspired to rob me blind. Dante stepped closer again, holding the silver pen just inches from my face. Listen to your mother. Dante growled, his hot breath washing over my face. Be a good daughter and sign the paper. Evelyn buried her face into my knees, sobbing loudly. Please, Kiara. She begged over and over again. Save my life. Sign the paper. Do not let me die. The emotional weight in the room was suffocating. My mother was using her own mortality as a weapon to force my hand, twisting my natural instinct to care for her into a heavy chain around my neck. The heavy chain around my neck pulled tight. I stared down at the top of my mother's head as she sobbed violently against my knees. For a fleeting second, the terrified daughter inside me wanted to surrender. I wanted to grab the silver pen from Dante's massive hand and sign my name just to make the screaming stop and save the woman who gave me life. But then the panic slowly began to clear from my mind. The thick emotional fog lifted, and the senior financial auditor took over. I took a slow, deep breath and forced myself to look past the tears and focus entirely on the numbers. The math simply did not make sense. Get off of me, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a flat, clinical tone. I stepped back, forcing Evelyn to release the hem of my silk maternity gown. She slumped onto the floor, looking up at me with smeared makeup and wide, confused eyes. I crossed my arms and looked down at her. You just said you need $150,000 for an out-of-network heart surgery. You said your money is tied up and you need Preston to pay for it. But Dad left you a $2 million pension fund completely separate from the family trust. That pension was structured in a highly liquid portfolio specifically designed for medical emergencies. Evelyn blinked, her tears stopping as she struggled to understand my words. I do not know anything about portfolios, Kiara, she stammered, wiping her face. Preston handles all of that for me. He is a real estate developer and he knows how to grow wealth. He told me the money was locked in long-term commercial investments, and taking it out now would cause massive penalty fees. That is why he offered to pay for the surgery out of his pocket. Because he is a good son-in-law who takes care of this family. I shifted my gaze away from my mother and looked directly at Preston. The arrogant smirk had completely vanished from Preston's face. His skin had turned an incredibly pale shade of gray. He swallowed hard, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Dante looked back and forth between us, lowering the silver pen slightly as the tension in the room shifted. That is enough financial talk, Kiara. Preston barked, his voice suddenly higher and thinner than before. Your mother is sick and needs this money. Stop trying to confuse her and just sign the paper so we can get her the medical care she desperately needs. I did not look away from him. My mind raced, pulling together every single detail I had noticed over the past year. The sudden downgrade in Sasha's wardrobe, Preston's desperate attempts to access my 15% trust stake, the fake fire alarm Julian pulled because he traced an offshore wire transfer. It all clicked perfectly into place. He is not paying for your surgery out of his own pocket, Mom, I said, keeping my eyes locked dead onto Preston. He does not have any money left. He did not invest your $2 million pension into commercial real estate to grow your wealth. He drained your accounts to save his sinking company. Sasha let out a sharp gasp, stepping away from her husband as if he had suddenly caught fire. Preston, tell me she is lying, Sasha demanded, her voice shaking with terror. Tell me you did not touch my mother's pension. Preston opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked completely paralyzed. I took a step toward him, feeling a surge of righteous power replacing all my previous fear. He stole every single cent you had, Mom. I continued, raising my voice so it echoed off the walls. His old money family is broke. His business is drowning in debt. He spent the last 2 years illegally siphoning your retirement fund to keep himself afloat. And when he ran out of money, he realized the only way to avoid federal prison was to steal my controlling stake in the trust. Evelyn let out a horrifying, breathless sound. She clutched her chest, staring at Preston with a look of absolute devastation. You told me my money was safe, Evelyn whispered, her body trembling. You told me I was protected. Preston wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, completely ignoring my mother. He looked at Dante with wild, desperate eyes. Make her sign it right now. Preston screamed, his polite facade completely destroyed. I do not care if you have to break her wrist, Dante. Pin her down and make her sign the paper before Julian gets back. But the entire dynamic in the room had already permanently shifted for us today. But the entire dynamic in the room had already permanently shifted for us today. I looked past Dante entirely and focused my gaze directly on Preston. I let out a loud, sharp laugh that echoed off the high ceiling of the VIP suite. The sound of my laughter completely stopped Preston in his tracks. His face twisted with intense confusion and blinding anger. What is so incredibly funny, Kiara? He demanded, stepping away from the heavy oak doors. You are funny, Preston, I replied, shaking my head with pure amusement. I am looking at a man who spent the last 5 years acting like royalty. You walked into our home wearing tailored suits and expensive watches, turning your nose up at my father because he built his wealth from the ground up instead of inheriting it. You made my mother feel like she had to beg for your approval. You made my sister change everything about herself just to fit into your elite social circles. And all this time you were nothing but a desperate broke fraud. Shut your mouth! Preston hissed, his hands balling into tight fists at his sides. I will not shut my mouth, I challenged, taking a step toward him. Dante shifted his weight but did not intervene. You are a common thief, Preston. The great old money heir of Atlanta is just a pathetic con artist stealing from his mother-in-law because he is too incompetent to run his own family business. How much debt are you actually in? 10 million, 20 million. You are bankrupt and you know it. The word bankrupt hit Preston like a physical blow. His fragile ego completely shattered right in front of my eyes. The cultured gentleman vanished entirely, replaced by a venomous, arrogant monster. I am not a common thief, Preston roared, his voice booming through the room. Dante, back away from her. I want to look this ungrateful little brat in the eyes when I speak to her. Dante lowered the silver pen and took a heavy step backward, clearly sensing that Preston was losing his mind. Preston marched across the room, stopping just inches away from me. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. You have absolutely no idea how the real world works, Kiara. Preston spat his eyes wide with unhinged fury. My family built this city. We built this. My grandfather laid the foundation for the real estate market in this entire state. We have a legacy that spans generations. We are the elite. Your father was nothing but a lucky upstart. He bought a few commercial buildings at the right time and suddenly thought he belonged in the same room as us. He did not deserve that wealth, and neither do you. Evelyn sobbed from the floor, looking up at the man she had practically worshipped. Preston, how can you say those things? She cried, her voice breaking. We treated you like a son. Preston slowly turned his head and looked down at my mother with absolute disgust. I am not your son, Evelyn, he sneered coldly. I tolerated you. I tolerated your desperate need to climb the social ladder, and I tolerated your tacky church friends. You people do not know how to wield real wealth. You hoard it in pension funds and family trusts like scared peasants. I took that money because it belongs in the hands of people who know how to build empires. I did not steal anything from you, Evelyn. I reclaimed capital that was being wasted on the lower class. Sasha let out a loud, devastated gasp, holding her hands over her face. Preston, you are talking about my family? She sobbed. I am your wife. You were a strategic acquisition. Sasha Preston fired back without an ounce of remorse. You are a beautiful woman with a very large bank account attached to your name. But do not flatter yourself. You were a means to an end. My company needed an immediate cash injection to survive the market crash, and your family had millions sitting around doing absolutely nothing. I deserve every single penny of that trust fund because I have the pedigree and the vision to actually use it. I stared at him, letting his horrific confession hang in the heavy air. You are completely delusional, I said, keeping my voice deadly calm. You just confessed to massive financial fraud in front of 4 witnesses. Julian is outside with federal agents right now. You are going to federal prison, Preston. Your legacy is over. Preston threw his head back and let out a loud, arrogant laugh. Federal agents, he mocked, waving his hand dismissively. You think I am scared of a few agents, Kiara? I play golf with federal judges. I fund the political campaigns of the district attorneys. I am a completely untouchable man in this city. Julian is a smart lawyer, but he is not a miracle worker. By the time he actually pieces together the offshore accounts, I will have already buried this entire scandal. My family name protects me from everything. I am invincible. He turned back to Dante, his face flushed with adrenaline and unhinged confidence. Grab her right now, Dante. Preston commanded, his voice echoing loudly. Force her hand onto the paper. She is going to sign away that 15% stake tonight, or she is never walking out of this hotel room. Preston believed his arrogant speech had solidified his dominance. He truly believed his old money status made him immune to the consequences of his own crimes. He stood tall and proud, waiting for his hired thug to finish the job. But he was about to learn that no amount of legacy could save him from the trap my husband had just set. Dante took a deep breath and lunged forward, reaching for my arm. Before his heavy hand could even graze the fabric of my dress, a massive explosion of sound shattered the tension in the room. The heavy oak doors of the VIP suite were not just unlocked. They were violently kicked open with such immense force that the brass deadbolt practically tore out of the wood frame. The heavy doors slammed against the interior walls, creating a deafening crash that made everyone jump in pure terror. Dante froze instantly, dropping his hand and spinning around to face the doorway. My mother Evelyn let out a terrified shriek, scrambling backward on the floor, while Sasha pressed herself flat against the far wall. Through the shattered doorway strode my husband Julian. He did not look like the calm and collected corporate attorney who had given a beautiful toast an hour ago. He looked absolutely lethal. His tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie was slightly loosened, and his dark eyes burned with a terrifying, calculated intensity. He moved with the quiet, dangerous grace of an apex predator who had finally cornered his prey. But Julian was not alone. Flanking him on both sides were four massive men dressed in dark tactical suits. Heavy duty belts rested on their hips, and bright yellow letters spelling FBI were printed boldly across their thick tactical vests. Silver badges gleamed under the harsh light of the crystal chandeliers. They poured into the room with strict military precision, immediately fanning out to secure the perimeter. One agent stepped directly in front of the broken doorway, blocking any chance of escape, while the other three spread across the room, their hands resting cautiously near their waistbands. The sheer authority radiating from the men instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Dante immediately realized he was completely out of his depth. The tattooed thug took 3 rapid steps backward, raising both of his hands high into the air in a gesture of total surrender. The silver pen clattered uselessly onto the floor, rolling away under the leather sofa. Preston, however, did not share Dante's basic survival instincts. Instead of showing fear, Preston's face lit up with a twisted, triumphant smile. He looked at the federal agents, and then looked at Julian, completely misreading the entire situation. His massive ego blinded him to the reality of the trap. "Good," Julian Preston shouted, his voice echoing loudly with arrogant satisfaction. "You brought the feds!" Preston casually adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt and stepped forward, acting like the man in charge. He clapped his hands together, let out a loud, arrogant laugh, and pointed a finger directly at me. "I have to admit, Julian, I am incredibly impressed by how fast you move." Preston continued walking toward my husband with a smug grin. "I knew you were a ruthless lawyer, but bringing federal agents to arrest this cheating wife of yours is a brilliant power play. She has been sitting here for the last 20 minutes refusing to confess to her extortion scheme. She actually tried to claim you were the one under investigation. It was pathetic. Did you bring the divorce papers for her to sign right now, or are they taking her straight to a holding cell?" Preston stopped just a few feet away from Julian, waiting for a handshake or a nod of approval. He truly believed he had won. He believed Julian was here to destroy me, and that his own financial crimes were safely hidden behind his old money family name. My mother Evelyn let out a long, dramatic sigh of relief from the floor. "Thank God, Julian," she cried out, holding her hand over her heart. "We tried to make her see reason. We tried to get her to confess to what she did with that horrible tattooed man, but she is completely delusional. Please, just take her away, so we can put this awful nightmare behind us." Sasha nodded vigorously, stepping away from the wall to stand beside her husband. "She is crazy, Julian." Sasha added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We are so sorry she did this to you. We fully support whatever you have to do to protect yourself and your assets from her." I remained seated on the leather sofa, my hands resting gently on my pregnant belly. I did not speak. I did not defend myself against their desperate lies. I just watched Julian. Julian stood perfectly still in the center of the room. He did not look at Preston. He did not look at Sasha or my mother. He did not acknowledge the federal agents. He just stared silently at me. Julian finally moved. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, bypassing the federal agents who stood like stone statues by the broken doorway. Preston smiled wider, extending his hand for a triumphant handshake, expecting my husband to congratulate him for catching a cheating wife. But Julian did not even blink at him. He walked right past Preston, leaving the arrogant real estate developer standing there with his hands suspended uselessly in the air. Julian ignored my mother, who was still whimpering on the floor. He ignored Sasha, who was trying to look like a supportive sister. He did not even cast a sideways glance at Dante, who was pressing his massive tattooed body as far into the corner as physically possible. Julian's focus was entirely locked on me. He stopped right in front of the leather sofa. The icy, detached expression he had worn in the ballroom was completely gone. In its place was a look of profound warmth and deep admiration. He reached up and slowly unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket. He slipped it off his broad shoulders and gently draped the heavy, warm fabric over my shivering frame. I had not even realized I was shaking until the residual heat from his jacket enveloped me. Julian leaned down, placing one hand gently on my cheek and the other resting softly over my pregnant belly. He leaned in and kissed me. It was not a quick, reassuring peck. It was a deep, passionate kiss, right in front of the people who had just spent the last half hour trying to destroy my life. It was a kiss that communicated 1,000 words without making a single sound. It told me he was proud of me for holding the line. It told me I was safe. And most importantly, it told our enemies that they had catastrophically failed. When Julian finally pulled back, he kept his hand on my cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear I had not been able to hold back. He smiled a genuine, loving smile. "I am so incredibly sorry for the theatrical exit, my love," Julian said, his voice deep and smooth, echoing clearly in the dead silent room. "I hated leaving you alone with them even for a second, but I needed a secure line and absolute privacy. It took exactly 14 minutes for my legal team and the bank to completely freeze their offshore accounts." Julian slowly stood up straight, turning his body to face Preston. The warmth in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced once again by the lethal gaze of a corporate predator. "Every single shell company, every hidden retirement fund, and every dirty trust account they were using has been seized," Julian announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "They are entirely broke, Kiara. We have them." The silence that followed his words was so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the VIP suite. Preston lowered his outstretched hand, his smug smile dropping into a mask of pure, utter confusion. He blinked rapidly, looking back and forth between Julian and the federal agents stationed around the room. "What are you talking about?" Preston stammered, his voice losing all of its previous arrogant boom. "Freeze whose accounts, Julian? She is the one who hired the thug. She is the one who tried to extort me. You are confused. You are making a massive mistake right now." Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before holding it up for Preston to see. I do not make mistakes, Preston, Julian replied, his tone dripping with lethal precision. I trace money for a living, and the wire transfer of $100,000 you sent to Dante this morning was incredibly sloppy. You tried to route it through a dummy corporation in the Cayman Islands, but you used the same IP address you used to log into your country club membership account. You practically handed me the murder weapon. Sasha let out a sharp, horrifying gasp. She stumbled backward away from Preston, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer panic. Evelyn scrambled up from the floor, clutching her chest as her face turned the color of ash. They finally realized the federal agents were not there to arrest me. The men in the tactical vests were there for Preston. "You set me up!" Preston yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "You and your manipulative wife orchestrated this entire thing to steal my legacy. I will sue you for everything you own, Julian. I will destroy your career. I will have your law license revoked by tomorrow." Julian simply tilted his head, looking at Preston like a bug. "You are finished here," Julian said, his voice deadly calm and unwavering. Before Preston could utter another desperate threat, a sudden movement in the corner of the room caught everyone's attention. Dante, the massive tattooed thug who had swaggered into the ballroom with so much fake confidence, was currently trying to quietly slide his way along the decorative wallpaper toward the broken oak doors. He was sweating profusely, his cheap gray suit clinging to his broad shoulders. He had realized the trap was fully sprung, and he wanted absolutely no part of a federal extortion case. He almost made it to the hallway, but the federal agents were not just standing around for decoration. The agent closest to the door, a tall man with arms like tree trunks, took one step forward and grabbed Dante by the back of his collar. With a single, effortless motion, the agent swung the massive thug around and slammed him face first into the thick drywall. The impact shook the entire room and knocked a framed painting of a landscape right off the wall. It shattered onto the hardwood floor. The agent kicked Dante's legs apart and pressed a heavy forearm against the back of his neck, pinning him securely against the crushed drywall. "Get your hands off me!" Dante yelled, his voice muffled against the wall. "I did not do anything wrong. I just delivered some papers. That rich guy paid me to do it." Julian slowly turned away from Preston and walked over to the glass coffee table. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the one currently draped over my shoulders, and pulled out a thick manila folder. The folder bore the official seal of a highly prestigious medical center in Atlanta. Julian casually tossed the folder onto the glass table, letting it land right on top of the forged ultrasound photos Dante had brought into the ballroom earlier. "You claim the baby my wife is carrying is yours, Dante?" Julian asked, his voice echoing in the silent suite. "You stood in front of 200 people and swore on your life that you were the biological father. I find that absolutely fascinating." Dante strained against the agent's grip, turning his head slightly to look at my husband with wide, panicked eyes. "I was just reading a script," Dante stammered desperately, trying to save himself. "I do not even know her." Julian ignored his pleas and pointed down at the medical file resting on the glass table. "Because if you actually were the father," Julian continued, speaking with the precise articulation of a lawyer delivering a closing argument, "that would be a medical miracle, completely defying the laws of human biology." 7 years ago, I was involved in a severe car accident on the interstate. The physical trauma to my body was extensive. It required multiple surgeries and months of intensive physical therapy just so I could walk again. But the internal damage was permanent. I am completely and permanently sterile. I have a 0% chance of ever conceiving a child naturally. The absolute silence that followed Julian's words was deafening. My mother, Evelyn, let out a soft, choked gasp, pressing both of her hands over her mouth. Sasha stared at Julian with her eyes completely bugged out of her head, unable to process the magnitude of the lie her husband had constructed. Even Preston, who had been pacing like a caged animal, suddenly froze in his tracks. The smug, arrogant real estate developer looked down at the medical file on the table, realizing the massive, fatal flaw in his master plan. Preston had hired a thug to claim my baby to force a divorce and ruin my credibility. But Preston had absolutely no idea about Julian's medical history. Julian and I had kept his sterility a closely guarded secret to protect his pride in a highly competitive corporate environment where weakness was often weaponized. We had never told my family. We had never told anyone. So Julian said, turning his cold, dark eyes back toward the tattooed man pinned against the wall. I will ask you one more time, Dante. How exactly did you manage to get my wife pregnant when I myself cannot? Did you use magic, or did you just accept $100,000 to help a desperate bankrupt man commit federal extortion? Dante did not hesitate for a single second. He completely cracked under the intense pressure of the federal agents and Julian's lethal interrogation. He paid me. Dante screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. Preston paid me $100,000 in cash to crash the party and read those text messages. He gave me the fake ultrasound pictures. He gave me the fake DNA test. I swear to God, I have never touched your wife. I just needed the money, man. Please do not let them send me to federal prison. Dante's confession echoed loudly off the high ceiling of the VIP suite, destroying any lingering trace of doubt. I sat comfortably on the leather sofa, wrapping Julian's warm suit jacket tighter around my shoulders. A profound sense of relief washed over me. The terrifying nightmare was completely unraveling right before my eyes. Preston had tried to use my unborn child as a weapon to steal my father's legacy, but his arrogant assumptions had led him directly into a concrete wall. Preston looked like he was going to be physically sick. The blood had entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny the devastating accusations, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He looked at Sasha, his wife, hoping for some kind of support or defense. But Sasha physically recoiled from him, pressing her back against the wall, as if he were a highly contagious disease. She finally realized that the man she had married for his money and his prestigious family name was nothing but a manipulative criminal who was about to lose absolutely everything. Julian did not smile. He simply stared at Preston, watching the arrogant old money developer completely shatter under the weight of his own hubris. The forged documents on the glass table were no longer a threat to my marriage or my career. They were now concrete physical evidence of a massive federal crime. And Julian was going to make sure Preston paid for every single second of pain he had caused our family tonight. Julian reached out and slowly opened the manila folder on the glass coffee table. He spread the certified medical documents out right next to the forged ultrasound photos. I want you all to look very closely at these official papers. Julian instructed, his voice echoing with cold authority. Because my wife did not just magically get pregnant, and she certainly did not get pregnant by a cheap street thug in a gray suit. The baby growing inside my wife is the result of 3 grueling years of secret in vitro fertilization treatments, Julian revealed. We spent 36 agonizing months flying back and forth to a highly specialized fertility clinic in Switzerland. We used sperm that I had securely frozen prior to my car accident. Kiara endured endless rounds of intense hormone injections, painful egg retrievals, and terrifying waiting periods. She put her body through absolute physical and emotional hell just to carry my biological child. I closed my eyes as a heavy wave of profound emotion washed over me. Julian was finally exposing our most guarded private secret. For 3 long years, I had suffered in complete silence. I had hidden the dark purple bruises from the daily stomach injections under long-sleeved silk blouses. I had strategically scheduled my stressful corporate audits around transatlantic flights to Geneva. I had cried silently in empty hotel bathrooms after multiple failed embryo transfers. My mother and my sister knew absolutely nothing about the agonizing medical journey we had walked. They had been entirely too busy complaining about their own trivial social problems to ever notice my silent pain. And tonight, Julian continued, his voice rising with fierce, protective anger. You stood in front of 200 people and aggressively accused her of infidelity. You accused a woman who fought tooth and nail for 3 brutal years to give us a family of sleeping with a random stranger. It is not just a disgusting lie, Preston. It is a strict biological impossibility and a sickening insult to the strongest woman I know. Evelyn let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob. She covered her face with both hands, completely overcome with deep shame. Kiara, I am so incredibly sorry, Evelyn wailed from the hardwood floor. I did not know any of this. You never told us you were struggling with a baby. How could I have possibly known? You did not know because you never bothered to actually ask, Mom, I replied, my voice completely flat and steady. You only care about people when they can directly elevate your fragile social standing. A daughter struggling with severe infertility did not fit neatly into your perfect church-going narrative. Sasha looked like she was going to pass out. She leaned heavily against the wall, her chest heaving as the horrific reality of her own actions fully set in. She had enthusiastically supported a man who had not only stolen her mother's entire retirement fund, but had also engineered a vile public smear campaign against her pregnant sister Dante, who was still pinned firmly against the wall by the massive federal agent, began to actively hyperventilate. The sheer magnitude of the situation had finally broken whatever tough guy persona he had left. He realized he was not just an accessory to a simple country club prank. He had willingly participated in a massive federal extortion plot against a billionaire corporate attorney. I swear to God, I did not know any of this medical stuff. Dante sobbed, his voice muffled against the crushed drywall. Preston just gave me the written script and the fake papers. He paid me $100,000 to do it. He said it would be an easy, quick job. He said the lawyer would just divorce her and no one would ever look into it. Please, you have to believe me. I will gladly testify against him. I will tell the federal judge absolutely everything. The federal agent pressed his heavy forearm slightly harder into Dante's tattooed neck. Keep your mouth shut until we formally read you your rights, the agent growled softly. Preston was completely trapped. His hired thug had just explicitly offered to become the star witness for the federal prosecution. The authentic medical documents on the table definitively proved his entire extortion plot was built on a scientifically verifiable lie. The offshore bank accounts he had used to fund his criminal activities were completely frozen by my husband. He had absolutely nowhere left to run. Preston tried to straighten his posture desperately, clinging to the very last shred of his ruined dignity. He looked at Julian with wild, bloodshot eyes, trying to find a way out. The brilliant real estate developer was sweating profusely and struggling to breathe as the reality of his impending imprisonment finally crushed his soul. Julian turned his lethal focus entirely away from Dante and locked his dark eyes onto Preston. The room was so quiet, I could hear the heavy, erratic breathing coming from my brother-in-law. Preston had completely run out of lies, and he had run out of wealthy family connections to hide behind. But Julian was not quite finished completely dismantling the man. You did not just hire a thug to crash our anniversary because you were desperate for cash, Julian said, his voice cutting through the thick air like a razor blade. You did it because you were terrified. You did it because my wife is the sharpest financial auditor in the entire state and you knew she had finally caught you. Sasha looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. Caught him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Caught him doing what, Julian? Julian did not look at Sasha. He kept his piercing gaze fixed directly on Preston, who was currently backing away until his shoulders hit the thick floral wallpaper. 3 months ago, Kiara noticed several minor discrepancies in the quarterly tax filings for your family trust, Julian explained. She did not say a single word to anyone because she is a highly trained professional. Instead, she quietly launched a comprehensive shadow audit into every single financial entity connected to the Preston family name. She spent countless nights combing through decades of offshore banking records, dummy shell corporations, and falsified real estate ledgers. I sat quietly on the leather sofa watching Preston physically shrink under the weight of the absolute truth. It was true. I had spent the last 90 days secretly tracking every stolen dollar and mapping out his entire criminal network. She found absolutely everything. Julian continued, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceiling. She found the forged signatures you used to drain Evelyn's retirement pension. She found the illegal wire transfers you used to cover your massive private gambling debts. She found the fraudulent loan applications you filed using Sasha's social security number. You have been running a massive criminal enterprise right under their noses for 5 long years. And Kiara finally gathered enough hard concrete evidence to put you in a federal prison for the rest of your natural life. Evelyn let out another horrifying gasp. My social security number, Sasha cried out, grabbing her own hair in pure panic. Preston, what did you do in my name? Preston clamped his hands over his ears, shaking his head violently. Shut up! Preston screamed, his voice cracking with sheer hysteria. Shut up right now! But Julian refused to stop. He stepped closer to Preston, completely invading his personal space. You knew she was building an airtight case against you, Julian said, his tone dripping with lethal precision. You knew it was only a matter of time before she handed that thick file over to the federal authorities. But then Kiara got pregnant. And you panicked. You realized that our child would legally solidify her controlling stake in the family trust forever. You realized you were completely out of time. The federal agents in the room shifted their weight, keeping their hands resting carefully near their heavy-duty utility belts. Dante remained perfectly still against the far wall, completely terrified of making any sudden movements. So you formulated a pathetic, desperate plan, Julian concluded, shaking his head with pure, absolute disgust. You decided the only way to save yourself was to completely destroy her professional credibility before she could expose you. You hired Dante to publicly frame her for infidelity. You wanted me to file for a vicious public divorce. You wanted the ensuing scandal to completely ruin her sterling reputation at her accounting firm. You thought if she was publicly branded as a manipulative, cheating gold digger, no judge and no federal investigator would ever believe her claims about your massive financial fraud. You tried to completely destroy an innocent pregnant woman just to save your own pathetic, fragile ego. Preston was hyperventilating, his chest heaving rapidly as the entire room stared at him with absolute revulsion. His masterful illusion of being a wealthy, untouchable old money gentleman was completely dead and buried. He was nothing but a desperate, cornered rat. I did it for the family, Preston suddenly yelled, dropping his hands from his ears and pointing a trembling finger at Julian. I was trying to protect our legacy. You do not understand the incredible financial pressure I am under. I had to make those moves to save the business. You do not have a legacy, Preston, Julian replied, his voice entirely devoid of any human sympathy. You are a common criminal, and your pathetic time running this ridiculous scam against my incredible pregnant wife is now officially and permanently up. Julian did not step back. Instead, he reached into his pocket one more time and pulled out his smartphone. You thought you were untouchable, Preston, Julian said, tapping the screen with his thumb. You thought your old money name gave you a shield against the consequences of your own arrogance. But when my wife first discovered your massive financial discrepancies 3 months ago, we did not just sit around waiting for you to strike. We hired a team of private investigators to monitor your business communications. And it turns out you are just as sloppy on the phone as you are with your offshore bank transfers. Julian pressed a button on his screen and turned the volume all the way up. The crystal-clear sound of a recorded telephone conversation instantly filled the dead-silent VIP suite. The audio started with the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then Preston's voice echoed through the room. It was not the cultured, polite tone he used at family dinners. It was harsh, cruel, and completely unhinged. Are you sure the fake ultrasound pictures look authentic? Preston asked through the phone speaker. Yeah, boss, they are perfect, a second voice replied, which everyone in the room immediately recognized as Dante. But are you sure her husband is going to buy this? He will not ask for anything. Preston laughed arrogantly through the recording. Julian is a proud man. He will take one look at those pictures and he will throw that trashy little gold digger right out onto the street. I cannot wait to see the look on her face when she loses everything. She is nothing but a low-class ghetto rat trying to play dress-up in our world. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as Preston continued to use horrific racial slurs against me on the recording. He degraded my background, my education, and my humanity with sickening ease. The pure hatred in his recorded voice was physically repulsive. I sat on the leather sofa wrapping Julian's suit jacket even tighter around my shoulders. I had always known Preston disliked me, but hearing the raw, unfiltered bigotry in his voice made my stomach violently turn. But the recording was not over. "What about the old lady?" Dante asked on the audio track. "The mother. Is she going to be a problem when the lawyer kicks the pregnant girl out?" Evelyn Preston sneered, letting out a loud, vicious laugh. "Are you kidding me? That stupid old woman is the easiest mark I have ever played in my entire life. She is so desperate to feel like she belongs in high society that she practically handed me the keys to her $2 million pension fund. I lost her entire retirement savings at the poker tables in Macau 6 months ago. By the time that ignorant old fool realizes her money is completely gone, I will have already secured Kiara's 15% stake in the family trust to cover my gambling debts. I am playing all of these pathetic people like a cheap fiddle." Julian tapped his phone screen, stopping the recording. The heavy silence that followed was entirely suffocating. My mother Evelyn let out a horrible, wretched sound from the floor. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and hunched over, violently gagging, as if she were about to physically vomit. The man she had blindly worshipped, the man she had allowed to slap and humiliate her own pregnant daughter, had just called her a stupid, ignorant fool on tape. He had laughed about destroying her life to pay for his secret gambling addiction. The devastating reality of his ultimate betrayal completely broke her mind. She rocked back and forth on the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Sasha was in no better condition. She slid slowly down the floral wallpaper until she hit the floor, pulling her knees up tightly against her chest. She buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly. Her perfect marriage, her wealthy social status, her entire fabricated reality had just been brutally exposed as a massive, sickening lie. Her husband viewed her family as nothing more than an open bank vault waiting to be robbed. The crushing guilt and absolute humiliation radiating from her was palpable. Preston stood frozen in the center of the room. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a walking corpse. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The undeniable audio evidence had completely destroyed any remaining defense he could possibly mount. His own arrogant voice had just confessed to massive federal financial fraud, illegal extortion, and severe gambling debts right in front of 4 armed federal agents. Julian slipped his phone calmly back into his pocket. "The agents have a copy of that recording," Julian informed Preston, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Along with a mountain of forensic accounting data my wife meticulously compiled. You are going away for a very long time." Preston shook his head rapidly, refusing to accept the reality closing in. He turned away from Julian and looked directly at the lead federal agent standing near the broken doorway. "You cannot arrest me," Preston demanded, his voice trembling but still clinging to his manufactured authority. "Do you have any idea who my father is? We built the real estate market in this city. I play golf with the federal judges who sign your warrants. If you put your hands on me, I will have your badges by tomorrow. I will ensure your careers are destroyed." The lead agent did not even blink. He reached to his tactical belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Preston James, you are under arrest for federal extortion, wire fraud, and grand larceny." The agent stated, his voice a flat, professional monotone. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Preston took a frantic step backward, bumping heavily into the wall. "Wait!" Preston yelled, his eyes wide with genuine panic as the agent took a step toward him. This is a massive misunderstanding. You cannot just come in here and arrest me. We are untouchable in Atlanta. Call your director right now. Call him and ask about my family name. Julian stepped forward, placing himself directly between Preston and the advancing federal agent. Julian raised his hand slightly, signaling the agent to pause for just one moment. The agent stopped, allowing the powerful corporate attorney to deliver the final devastating blow. Julian leaned in close so his face was mere inches from Preston's sweating pale face. Your family name cannot save you anymore, Preston. Julian whispered, his voice dropping to a cold, lethal register. Because your family name does not mean anything. At 9 o'clock this morning, your father officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in federal court. Preston froze, his breath catching painfully in his throat. That is impossible, Preston stammered, staring wildly. My father has millions in reserve capital. He had millions, Julian corrected smoothly. But your father made terrible investments trying to cover the massive financial holes you left in his ledgers. When the banks called in their heavy loans this week, he had absolutely nothing left. His firm was entirely insolvent. So he was forced to sell. And do you want to know who handled the emergency mergers and acquisitions deal that swallowed your father's company this morning? Preston stared at Julian, his blue eyes wide with absolute horror. The devastating realization hit him like a runaway freight train. It was my firm, Julian confirmed, a dark, victorious smile, touching the corners of his mouth. I personally drafted the acquisition papers while you were hiring thugs to ruin my anniversary. I bought your precious family legacy for pennies on the dollar. Your father is completely ruined. Your company is gone. Your bank accounts are frozen. You have absolutely no money, no power, and no political connections left. You are nobody. The absolute finality of Julian's words completely shattered Preston's fragile mind. The arrogant real estate developer let out a guttural, agonizing scream. He lunged forward wildly, swinging his fists at Julian in a blind, desperate rage. But Julian simply stepped to the side, effortlessly avoiding the clumsy, pathetic attack. Before Preston could recover his balance, the lead federal agent grabbed his shoulder and slammed him face first into the floral wallpaper. Preston screamed, thrashing his legs and kicking wildly, but two more agents instantly swarmed his struggling body. They pinned his arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing through the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Get your hands off me! Preston roared, his face completely red, as the agents dragged him backward away from the wall. I am not nobody, I am a wealthy gentleman. I am rich. You cannot do this to me. I will destroy all of you. The agents ignored his pathetic screams. They marched him forcefully toward the broken oak doors, hauling him out of the VIP suite like a street criminal. Dante, the tattooed thug, watched the scene with wide, terrified eyes before another agent grabbed his collar and shoved him out the door right behind his wealthy employer. Preston's furious screams echoed down the hotel hallway, slowly fading away as they dragged him toward the elevators. Inside the VIP suite, the silence returned heavier and more suffocating than ever before. Sasha remained curled up on the hardwood floor, trembling violently as the reality of her ruined life finally set in. My mother, Evelyn, stared blankly at the empty doorway, completely catatonic. The great old money savior they had chosen over their own flesh and blood was gone, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the ashes of their own greed. The heavy wooden doors remained wide open, exposing the empty hotel hallway. The flashing red lights of the police cruisers parked outside reflected faintly against the corridor walls. I sat perfectly still on the leather sofa, feeling the gentle weight of Julian's suit jacket over my shoulders. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the past hour began to slowly ebb away, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. The chaotic storm was finally over. But the wreckage left behind was entirely pathetic. My mother, Evelyn, was the first to break the suffocating silence. She blinked rapidly, her eyes snapping back into focus as if waking from a deep hypnotic trance. She looked around the luxurious VIP suite, her gaze lingering on the torn transfer document resting on the glass coffee table. Then she looked at me. The harsh, arrogant woman who had slapped my face and ordered me out of my own marriage was entirely gone. In her place was a fragile, terrified old woman who had just realized she was completely broke. Evelyn pushed herself up from the hardwood floor. Her expensive church dress was wrinkled, and her carefully styled hair was a disheveled mess. She took a slow, trembling step toward the leather sofa. She did not walk with her usual demanding posture. She practically crawled. "Kiara," she whispered, her voice shaking with raw desperation. "My beautiful daughter." I did not move. Julian stood silently by my side, acting as an impenetrable physical barrier between me and the women who had conspired to destroy me. He watched them with absolute disgust, but he did not intervene. He knew this was my battle to finish. Evelyn reached out, stopping just short of touching my knee. "Oh, my sweet girl." Evelyn sobbed, fresh tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "I am so incredibly sorry. You have to believe me. I had absolutely no idea what Preston was really doing. I was a victim, Kiara. He manipulated me. He used his fancy vocabulary and his wealthy background to trick a sick, vulnerable old woman. I thought he was trying to save my life, but he was just using me to get to your inheritance." I simply stared at her, letting her pathetic excuses hang in the air. She was trying to rewrite history. Before I could respond, a loud, agonizing wail echoed from the corner. Sasha scrambled up from the floor. She threw herself across the suite, falling onto her knees right beside our mother. Sasha looked absolutely feral. The perfectly manicured socialite was gone, replaced by a woman staring directly into the terrifying abyss of total financial ruin. "Kiara, please," Sasha begged, grabbing the edge of the coffee table. "You have to help me." "You heard Julian. Preston's bank accounts are frozen. His family company is bankrupt. Everything is gone. The house, the cars, the credit cards. They will take everything away by tomorrow. I have nothing left." Sasha's voice, pitched higher, turning into a hysterical shriek. "What am I going to do, Kiara? I have 2 young children. We cannot live on the street. We cannot go to a homeless shelter. You have to let us move into your mansion. Julian has plenty of room at the estate. We can take the guest wing, just until I get back on my feet. Please, Kiara, you have to let us move in." I looked at my older sister, the golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on me, the woman who had just stood in a ballroom and told 200 people that I was a trashy street rat who cheated on my husband. Now she was begging to live in my guest room. "We are family," Kiara, Evelyn chimed in, her voice dripping with thick, manipulative emotion. She reached out again. "Family forgives. Blood is thicker than water. We made a terrible mistake, but we are still your mother and your sister. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood. God would never forgive you for turning your back on your family when we need you the most." Sasha nodded vigorously, tears dripping off her chin. "Yes, Kiara, we are blood," Sasha cried out. "We are blood. I know we said some awful things tonight, but Preston forced us. He brainwashed us against you, but he is gone now. It is just us girls again. We can fix this. Just take us home with you tonight." They looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes. They were completely convinced my lifelong habit of fixing their problems would save them one last time. They thought the magic words of family would instantly erase the ultimate betrayal they had committed. I looked at the 2 women kneeling on the floor, feeling completely cold and entirely numb. I slowly stood up from the leather sofa, letting Julian's warm suit jacket slide down slightly before adjusting it back over my shoulders. The sudden movement made Sasha and Evelyn look up with a fleeting spark of hope in their tear-filled eyes. They actually thought I was going to reach out my hands to them. They expected me to pull them up from the hardwood floor and wrap them in a forgiving embrace, just like I always did when we were younger. But I kept my hands firmly at my sides. I stood tall looking down at the two women who had happily tried to orchestrate my absolute destruction less than an hour ago. The numbness inside my chest hardened into an impenetrable wall of solid steel. "You are not my family," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion or warmth. The words hung in the quiet room, sharp and absolute. Evelyn let out a choked gasp, shaking her head. "Please do not say that, Kiara," she pleaded. "I will say it, because it is the absolute truth." I continued looking directly into my mother's eyes. "You keep throwing the word family around like it is some kind of magical spell that forces me to endure your toxic abuse forever. But you do not know the first thing about what that word actually means. A real mother does not slap her pregnant daughter across the face in a locked room. A real sister does not stand in front of 200 people and invent vicious lies to ruin a marriage. You completely destroyed the sacred bond that is supposed to protect us from the cruel outside world. You tore down the walls of our shared history and replaced them with pure greed and a sickening thirst for my personal downfall. You did not act like family tonight. You acted like greedy, desperate vultures circling a body that was not even dead yet." Sasha buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. "We were tricked, Kiara," Sasha cried out, her voice muffled. "Preston manipulated us. He lied to us about the money and the business." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that made them both flinch. "Do not you dare try to play the innocent victim right now. Sasha," I snapped, my voice rising with fierce, unyielding authority. "You did not get tricked. You heard a man call your own sister a whore. You watched a tattooed stranger accuse me of the most vile betrayal possible. And instead of standing up for my honor, you enthusiastically joined the firing squad. You did not hesitate for a single second. You heard Preston degrade my background and my character. You knew he was trying to ruin my life and take my baby away. And your response was to literally hand him the pen to steal my inheritance. You both stood there and counted down the seconds while he held a gun to my career. You wanted me to sign that paper. You wanted me to lose." Evelyn pressed her hands against her chest, weeping uncontrollably. "I was scared, Kiara," my mother wailed. "I thought I was going to die without that heart surgery. I told you the truth about my medical condition. I was terrified." "You were not terrified of dying, Mom," I corrected her coldly. "You were terrified of losing your fake social status. You were terrified of looking poor in front of your wealthy church friends. You were completely willing to sacrifice your own daughter and your unborn grandchild just to keep up the pathetic illusion that you belonged in Preston's elite world. You made a calculated decision. You weighed my life against your pristine reputation, and you chose to sell me out for cash. You chose your side. Both of you made your choice tonight," I declared, my tone dropping to a final lethal whisper. "You looked at the board and you bet your entire lives on the arrogant white real estate developer. You thought he was the winning ticket. You thought he would crush me and reward you with the spoils of my stolen trust fund. But you bet on the wrong man. And now you have to live with the devastating consequences of your own greed." Sasha reached out blindly, trying to grab my ankle, but I took a deliberate step backward out of her reach. "Do not touch me," I ordered. "I am done fixing your mistakes. I am done paying for your lies. I am done being the scapegoat for this incredibly broken family. You made your bed with Preston, and now you get to burn in it right alongside him. There is absolutely no forgiveness left in my heart for either of you. You are absolutely nothing to me right now." I watched the color drain from Sasha's face as the finality of my words struck her. "Since our father passed away, you have treated his wealth like a personal ATM, I said, my voice carrying a sharp clinical authority. You used his money to fund your luxury vacations and your perfect country club image. But those days are officially over, Sasha. As of this exact moment, I am exercising my absolute legal authority over the 15% controlling stake. I am permanently freezing your access to the primary estate funds. You will not see a single dime from the family trust ever again. Sasha gasped, gripping the edge of the glass coffee table. Kiara, you cannot do that! She cried, her voice cracking with sheer panic. Preston maxed out all of our credit cards. The bank is going to foreclose on my house by the end of the month. How am I supposed to feed my children? You are going to do what I did when you went to rehab, I replied coldly. You are going to get a job, Sasha. You are going to update your resume and work 40 hours a week. I hear the local coffee shops are hiring. You are never touching our father's money to fix the massive mess your husband created. My mother Evelyn let out a long, trembling sigh, pressing her hand against her chest. And what about me, Kiara? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you going to let your own mother die of a heart attack just to prove a point? Are you going to leave me on the street? I am not a monster, Mom, I answered, staring down at her. I am not going to let you die, but I am also never handing you another blank check. Julian and I have established a strictly managed medical trust in your name. We transferred enough capital to cover your upcoming heart surgery and post-operative care. But listen to me very carefully. You will never see a single penny of that money in cash. The medical trust is managed by an independent third-party fiduciary, I explained slowly. The trust will pay the hospital surgeons and the rehabilitation clinic directly. There will be absolutely no cash withdrawals. There will be no extra funds for your fancy church outfits or expensive lunches. Furthermore, I am authorizing a strict monthly stipend of exactly $500 for your basic living expenses. That money will be paid directly to a modest apartment complex of my choosing. You will not handle the rent or the utilities. You are now entirely cut off from the luxury lifestyle you sold me out to protect. Evelyn buried her face in her hands, weeping silently. She finally understood that her days of manipulating the family finances to maintain her fake high society status were completely destroyed. Julian stepped forward silently, handing me a thick manila folder he had retrieved from his briefcase. I opened the folder and pulled out 2 crisp legal documents. I tossed them onto the glass coffee table right next to the torn transfer paper. What is this? Sasha asked, staring down with red, swollen eyes. These are permanent restraining orders drafted by Julian and signed by a federal judge less than an hour ago, I announced, keeping my voice incredibly firm. They take effect immediately. You are legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me, my husband, our home, or our respective workplaces. You are banned from contacting us through any third party. Sasha let out a loud, agonizing sob. Evelyn shook her head violently, refusing to look at the legal documents on the table. Kiara, please do not do this, Evelyn wailed, her voice breaking completely. You cannot cut us out of your life forever. I am going to be a grandmother. I have a right to see my grandchild. You lost every single right you had to my child the second you handed Preston that silver pen. I fired back, my voice echoing loudly off the walls of the VIP suite. You chose to support a man who actively tried to ruin my baby's future just so you could keep your country club memberships. You will never meet this child. You will never attend a birthday party, a school play, or a graduation. You will never even see a single photograph of my baby. As far as you both are concerned, I no longer exist. If either of you ever tries to violate these strict restraining orders, Julian will personally ensure you are immediately thrown into a federal jail cell right next to Preston. This was the exact permanent consequence of their endless selfish greed. I had finally severed the heavy toxic chains. I was finally and completely free. I turned away from the 2 women kneeling on the hardwood floor. I did not offer them a final goodbye. I did not look back to see the devastating tears streaming down my mother's face or the pathetic trembling of my sister's shoulders. They had made their choices and I had delivered their consequences. Julian placed his warm hand firmly on the small of my back, gently guiding me toward the shattered oak doors of the VIP suite. We stepped out into the dimly lit hotel hallway, leaving the sounds of their frantic sobbing behind us, forever. The walk through the Ritz-Carlton felt incredibly different than our arrival earlier that evening. We moved with a synchronized, quiet power. My head was held high and my spine was perfectly straight. Julian kept his arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders, his heavy suit jacket still keeping the evening chill away from my shivering body. We bypassed the main ballroom where the remnants of our ruined anniversary party still lingered. A few straggling guests and hotel staff members stopped and stared at us, their eyes wide with intense curiosity after witnessing the federal agents drag Preston through the lobby in steel handcuffs. But I did not care about their whispers or their harsh judgments anymore. Their opinions belonged to a toxic world I had just permanently exited. We pushed through the heavy glass doors of the grand lobby and stepped out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night air. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles were already fading into the distance, taking the arrogant real estate developer exactly where he belonged. Our private black town car was idling quietly at the curb. The driver quickly stepped out and pulled the rear door open for us, offering a respectful nod. Julian helped me slide onto the plush leather seats before climbing in right beside me. The heavy car door slammed shut instantly, cutting off the ambient noise of the busy city street. For the first time all evening, we were completely alone. The suffocating tension that had gripped my muscles for the past hour instantly dissolved. I let out a long, shaky breath and leaned my head against Julian's broad shoulder. He immediately wrapped both of his arms around me, pulling me tightly against his chest. He pressed a warm, lingering kiss to the top of my head and let out a deep sigh of profound relief. "You were absolutely magnificent in there, Kiara," Julian whispered, his deep voice vibrating against my cheek. "I have faced down some of the most ruthless corporate sharks in the country, but I have never seen anyone dismantle an opponent with such absolute surgical precision. You completely broke them without ever raising your voice." I smiled tiredly, resting my hand over his chest to feel the steady, comforting rhythm of his heartbeat. "I learned from the very best corporate attorney in the state," I replied softly, looking up into his dark eyes. "But I could not have done any of this without you, Julian. When you walked out of that ballroom and left his fake DNA test on the table, I felt my entire world collapsing. I should have known you were just clearing the blast radius." Julian let out a soft, genuine chuckle. He reached down and gently traced his thumb across my jawline. "I had to sell the performance." "My love," he explained, his tone filled with absolute adoration. "If Preston thought I was staying to fight for you, he would have kept his guard up. I needed him to believe he had won, so he would make a mistake. But the real victory belongs entirely to you, Kiara. That shadow audit you ran on his dummy corporations was a masterpiece of financial forensics. You tracked those offshore wire transfers through 5 different shell companies. The federal agents were practically drooling when I handed them your organized files. You built an airtight criminal case straight from our home office." I shifted comfortably against him, intertwining my fingers with his. "And you set the perfect trap." I praised him, feeling a surge of profound pride for the man I had married. Tracing his payment to Dante using his own country club IP address was a stroke of absolute genius. You let his massive ego become his own executioner. We make a terrifyingly effective team. "We really do." Julian agreed, his smile widening into a brilliant grin. He moved his hand from my jawline and rested it gently over my pregnant belly. Our unborn baby gave a soft, sudden kick against his palm, as if agreeing with his statement. Julian laughed, a bright, joyful sound that completely erased the lingering darkness of the night. We sat quietly in the back of the town car, watching the bright city lights blur past the tinted windows. We had faced the absolute worst kind of betrayal, and we had emerged completely victorious. The toxic chains of my past were permanently severed, and the future waiting for our growing family was incredibly bright. I closed my eyes, leaning into my husband's embrace, ready to finally go home. The quiet hum of the town car engine eventually faded into the profound peace of the next 4 months. Summer gave way to a crisp, beautiful autumn, and the dark shadows of that terrible anniversary night completely vanished from our lives. I sat comfortably in the plush rocking chair positioned right next to the massive bay windows of our living room. The warm, golden morning sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, illuminating the quiet sanctuary Julian and I had carefully built. I looked down at the tiny, perfect bundle resting safely against my chest. Our newborn son was sound asleep, his tiny fingers wrapped securely around a single strand of my hair. He breathed with a soft, rhythmic cadence that instantly melted away any lingering stress in my body. The brutal 3-year journey of secret medical treatments and the terrifying extortion plot felt like a distant, fading nightmare. We had finally won. Across the spacious room, the large, flat-screen television played quietly at a low volume. The morning news anchor sat behind a sleek desk, delivering the local headlines. I gently rocked the chair back and forth as a familiar face suddenly flashed onto the screen. It was Preston. The photograph displayed was not the polished, arrogant real estate developer in a tailored suit. It was a bleak federal mugshot. His face was pale, his eyes were entirely hollow, and his expensive haircut was a disheveled mess. The news anchor announced the final verdict of the highly publicized corporate fraud trial. Preston James, the former heir to a massive Atlanta real estate empire, had officially been sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal prison. The judge had shown absolutely zero leniency, citing his aggressive extortion tactics and his complete lack of remorse. His entire old money legacy was permanently erased, reduced to a cautionary tale broadcasted on the morning news. I watched the screen with absolute detachment, feeling no pity for the man who had tried to destroy my child's future. The broadcast briefly mentioned the collateral damage of Preston's massive criminal enterprise. The subsequent investigations had left his immediate family completely destitute. Through the strict legal boundaries Julian had established, I already knew the harsh reality of their new lives. Sasha, the sister who had happily handed Preston the pen to steal my inheritance, was now working a grueling retail job at a discount clothing store in the suburbs. The woman who used to mock my minimum wage college jobs was now spending 40 hours a week folding cheap sweaters just to keep a roof over her children's heads. My mother, Evelyn, was no longer hosting lavish luncheons for her wealthy church friends. She was currently residing in a tiny, strictly managed assisted living facility on the outskirts of the city. The medical trust Julian and I set up paid for her basic care and her meals, but she did not have a single dollar of actual cash to her name. Her toxic social climbing days were permanently over. They had gambled their entire lives on a ruthless criminal, and they had lost absolutely everything. Heavy footsteps echoed softly from the hallway, breaking my train of thought. Julian walked into the sunlit living room, holding 2 steaming mugs of fresh coffee. He was dressed in comfortable sweatpants and a simple gray t-shirt, completely relaxed in his role as a new father. He set the mugs down on the side table and leaned over the rocking chair, kissing my forehead before pressing a gentle kiss to our sleeping son's cheek. He looked at the television screen, catching the tail end of the news report about Preston. Julian did not say a word. He just smiled warmly at me and reached out to gently stroke the baby's soft hair. I looked up at my brilliant, protective husband and then down at the beautiful miracle resting in my arms. For my entire life, society and my mother had aggressively conditioned me to believe that blood was an unbreakable bond. They taught me that you had to endure endless abuse and betrayal simply because you shared the same genetics. But sitting here in the profound safety of my own home, I finally understood the absolute truth. Family is not blood. Family is not a shared last name or a forced obligation. Family is the person who stands firmly by your side when the wolves bare their teeth. Family is the person who builds a fortress to protect you when the rest of the world tries to tear you down. The toxic wolves of my past were permanently gone, locked away in federal cells and tiny apartments. I took a deep breath of the warm morning air, feeling a complete and utter sense of freedom. Now, my real family life finally begins. The compelling story of Kiara and Julian, offers a profound masterclass in self-worth, but its most vital lesson is the necessary redefinition of family. For generations, society has pushed the narrative that blood is thicker than water, demanding unconditional loyalty to relatives regardless of how poorly they treat us. Kiara's harrowing experience shatters this dangerous misconception, proving that sharing DNA does not obligate you to endure toxic abuse. In the narrative, Kiara's mother and sister weaponized familial guilt to manipulate her, prioritizing their own social status and greed over her safety. They expected her to blindly sacrifice her inheritance and her future, assuming her lifelong habit of fixing their mistakes would save them one last time. This highlights a crucial, often uncomfortable reality. Biological ties do not automatically grant someone a free pass to exploit your vulnerability. Toxicity is toxicity, even when it comes wrapped in a shared last name. Conversely, true family is demonstrated through unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and protective action. Julian proved that a real partner stands as a fortress when the wolves bare their teeth. He didn't just offer empty comfort, he engaged in a synchronized strategic defense to protect the life they built together. Kiara's ultimate victory was not merely surviving a criminal extortion plot, it was finding the absolute strength to walk away from the people who repeatedly broke her trust. Letting go of toxic relatives is never a failure. It is an act of profound self-preservation. You are allowed to protect your peace, even if it means walking away from the people who gave you life. Evaluate the relationships in your own life and have the courage to set firm boundaries against anyone who demands your loyalty while actively disrespecting your peace.